You can stay with us until you're better, my daughter said, holding my hand gently after surgery. We'll take care of you, Dad. We're family. That was the beginning of everything. The promise of kindness. The illusion of home. And I wanted to believe her. But sometimes betrayal doesn't knock. It whispers through a kind smile. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments. What would you do if your daughter offered you comfort but had a plan to take your home behind your back? My name is Frank. I'm 72 years old. And I don't like being helped. That's probably the most honest thing I can say about myself. I was raised in a generation that fixed things with their hands and kept pain out of their voices. I lived modestly, worked as a schoolteacher for 4 decades, and loved one woman for 50 years. When she died 5 years ago, the silence in our home was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. But I stayed. I stayed in that old house on Cedar Lane. The one with peeling white shutters and a pear tree out front. The one I'd paid off, repaired, and cherished like a family member. It was the only thing truly mine. A symbol of effort. Of love. Of time. The accident happened on a Tuesday. It was raining, not hard, just enough to blur a windshield. I was walking to the corner store for bread and eggs. Next thing I remember, I was waking up in a hospital bed, my ribs cracked and my hip fractured. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive. I didn't feel lucky. I felt broken. Vulnerable. That's when Diane appeared. My only daughter. My precious girl. She used to run into my arms after school, hair in braids, hands full of crayon drawings. Now she was a grown woman with careful eyes and a firm voice. She sat beside my bed and said, "Dad, I talked to Kyle. You're coming to stay with us until you're back on your feet." No arguments. I didn't argue. How could I? Their house was quiet when I arrived. Too quiet. Kyle greeted me with a stiff handshake and a rehearsed smile. He was always like that, polite but distant. He worked in real estate, always on the phone, always talking about percentages and property lines. I never quite understood what Diane saw in him. But I stayed out of it. A father learns when to speak, and when to stay silent. The first few days were peaceful. I had a small room at the end of the hallway. They even placed a blanket on the armchair near the window so I could read in the afternoons. Diane brought me tea. Kyle carried my suitcase. It felt warm. And I let myself feel grateful. But something subtle began to shift. Not in big gestures. In the little things. Like the way Diane's voice became clipped when I asked for help getting up from bed. Or how Kyle began walking into my room without knocking, just to check if I was sleeping. And the nurse visits, they grew shorter, more rushed. Once, when I asked if we could adjust my medication, Diane said, "Dad, we're not running a hospital." I smiled. Let it slide. I didn't want to be a burden. Maybe I was asking too much. After 2 weeks, I began to notice they rarely sat with me anymore. Meals were quiet. They talked about work, parties, weekend plans, as if I wasn't sitting 2 chairs away. When I joined them in the living room to watch the evening news, Kyle would suddenly remember calls to make. Diane would start folding laundry that didn't need folding. I told myself they were just busy. I repeated that like a prayer. They're busy. Not cold. Not cruel. Just busy. One night, I heard laughter from the kitchen. Real laughter. The kind I hadn't heard in days. I followed the sound as far as the hallway, careful not to let my walker make too much noise. They were pouring wine, laughing about something I didn't understand. And then Kyle said, "Well, if things go as planned, that place is practically ours anyway." Diane giggled. I couldn't hear her response. But the laughter faded quickly when I stepped in to grab a glass of water. They went silent. "Everything okay, Dad?" she asked. I nodded. And walked back to my room, feeling the air get colder behind me. That night I sat by the window for hours. Looking out into the backyard. It wasn't my backyard. But it reminded me of mine. Of summer nights when Diane was 5, chasing fireflies with her mother. Of barbecue Sundays. Of birthdays under the pear tree. How did we get here? I didn't want to believe anything bad. Not yet. I told myself maybe I was just tired. Old. Sensitive. But deep down, a chill had started to grow in my chest. The next morning, I reached into my duffel bag and pulled out my old leather notebook. I flipped to a blank page. And I wrote, "Home is not just walls and windows. It's where your name still means something." I underlined it twice. And closed the book. Something was wrong. And I needed to stay quiet. To watch. To wait. Because the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it waits behind a smile. And I had a feeling the smile would soon crack. The day began like the others. Muted. Unspoken. Carl had made coffee, but not for me. Diane had already left for work. I stayed in my room. I didn't want to bother anyone. But around noon, I tried to get up and walk to the kitchen. My hip still hurt from the accident. And I hadn't eaten since the night before. So I called out. Softly. "Kyle? If you're nearby, could I bother you for a glass of water?" Nothing at first. Then heavy footsteps. Then a door swinging open harder than it needed to. Kyle stood at the doorway. Arms crossed. Jaw tight. "You need water," he said slowly. "You need something again?" I blinked, confused. "Yes. I'm sorry, I just—" "You think we're your servants," he snapped. "You think this is a damn retirement center?" My mouth went dry. Not from thirst. But from the cold in his voice. "Every day it's something. Diane and I have lives, Frank. Real lives. Jobs. Bills. You don't get to sit in that room like a king and ring a damn bell every time you want something." I didn't mean," I tried to say. But he was already walking away. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "You better get your act together before Diane gets fed up too." And then he was gone. The water never came. I didn't move for hours. Not because I couldn't. But because I didn't know how to process what just happened. I thought maybe Diane would come home and things would shift. She always had a gentler tone. More patience. But that night, something was different in her face. Tighter. Colder. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She sat across from me with her arms folded. Kyle stood behind her, not speaking, just watching. She cleared her throat. "Dad, I need to say something. And I need you to listen without interrupting." I nodded. My hands trembling in my lap. "You're staying in our house now. You're eating our food. Using our heat. And we never asked for anything in return. But Kyle and I have been talking, and this arrangement, it's not sustainable." I stared at her, unable to speak. She leaned forward slightly. Voice quieter. But sharper. "You should be grateful you're even alive." The words landed like a slap. "You're lucky we let you stay here. But there's a cost to everything, Dad. And frankly, the house on Cedar Lane, you don't need it anymore. Kyle and I do." I looked at her. I didn't recognize the woman in front of me. "You want my house?" Kyle finally stepped in. "It's not just about wanting, Frank. It's about logic. You're not going back there anytime soon. It's just sitting there. Wasting away. Meanwhile, we're cramped here, struggling." Struggling? They had a 2-story home. 2 cars. A vacation photo on every wall. "I built that house," I said quietly. "With my hands. I paid off every cent. It's not an asset, it's my life." Kyle laughed. Actually laughed. "Your life? Frank, it's wood and bricks. That's all. You think that makes you special." Then he stepped forward. Too close. Too fast. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Sign the damn papers. Make it official." Diane didn't stop him. She didn't say a word. I stood up. Slowly. My walker trembling beneath my grip. But I stood. I looked Kyle in the eyes. "I'm not dead yet," I said. "And that house is still mine." His smile disappeared. He took another step toward me, chest puffed. "Don't test me, old man." And for the first time, I saw it. The truth behind the eyes. He didn't care if I lived or died. In fact, maybe. He was hoping for the latter. That night, I locked my door. It wouldn't stop him. But it gave me one thing I still had. Choice. I didn't sleep. I sat with the lights off, thinking, remembering, holding a photo of my wife in my hands, wishing she could see what had become of our family. Then I opened my notebook again, and I wrote, "Survival isn't enough. Dignity is oxygen." The next morning, Diane knocked on the door. Her voice was soft again. Too soft. Like a nurse pretending everything was fine. "Dad, can we talk?" I didn't answer. Not yet. Let them wonder. Let them squirm. Because I had spent a lifetime giving, teaching, fixing, forgiving. But now I was done being quiet. I waited until they left for work. Diane was always gone by 8. Kyle usually lingered, pacing in the kitchen like a landlord surveying a tenant. But today, by some miracle, they both left by 8:30. And for the first time in weeks, I was alone. Not in a room. Not in a hallway. But truly alone. In a silence I could finally breathe in. I picked up my old phone, the one I kept hidden in my suitcase. The screen was cracked. The battery low. But it still worked. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 10 years. My old neighbor, Mason. He answered on the second ring. "Frank? Is that you?" I nearly cried at the sound of his voice. He had the kind of voice that sounded like worn-out wood and pipe smoke. Familiar. Solid. "Mason," I whispered, "I need a favor." I told him everything. Not all at once. Just the truth in pieces. He didn't ask questions. Just said, "I'm coming tomorrow. First light. You'll be home by noon." Home. That word hit harder than I expected. It wasn't just a building. It was the only place I had left where I was still me. But I wasn't careful enough. I didn't realize Kyle had forgotten his phone. He came back. Quietly. And he heard me. I didn't see him until I turned around and found him standing in the doorway. Arms folded. Eyes cold. "You're making calls now, huh?" I froze. He stepped closer. Slowly. Measured. "Who was that? One of your old army buddies? Gonna drag you out on a stretcher." "It's none of your business," I said, voice firmer than I expected. He smirked. Then fast. He reached out, grabbed the phone, and slammed it against the wall. It shattered. Like bone. "You're not going anywhere, Frank," he growled. "Not until we settle the house. Not until you sign." Then he stepped out. And before I could move, he slammed the door shut behind him. And locked it. I heard the click. I heard the key turning. I heard Diane's voice from the hallway. Soft. Panicked. "Kyle, what are you doing?" "He's not leaving. Not until he does the right thing." She didn't protest again. Not loud enough for me to hear. I was locked in. An old man. Trapped like a child in timeout. But I didn't panic. I sat on the bed. And I breathed. This wasn't defeat. This was confirmation. They were desperate. Desperation makes people reckless. And reckless people make mistakes. That night, they brought me food. Kyle slid a tray through the door like I was in a prison. Diane stood behind him, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Not guilt. Not shame. Maybe fear. Fear of what her husband might do. Or fear that I still had strength left. I didn't touch the food. Instead, I opened my notebook. And I wrote. When they lock the door, it means they're afraid of what happens when it opens. I slept in intervals. Every creak in the hallway kept me alert. I started making a list in my head. People I knew. Friends I had helped. Students I had taught. People who owed me nothing, but remembered me with kindness. I would not beg, but I would reach. And I would walk out of this room. Even if I had to crawl. The next morning, I woke to shouting. Diane and Kyle. Arguing. I couldn't hear everything. But I caught this. "You're going too far, Kyle. He's still my father." "Then act like it," he spat. "Or he'll leave us no choice." No choice? They were running out of options. That was clear. And that meant my silence was working. Let them twist. Let them spiral. Because when Mason arrived tomorrow, He wouldn't knock on the front door. He'd come around the back. Like we used to. Like friends do when it matters. I walked to the window, pulled open the curtain, and let the light hit my face. I was tired. Yes. But not broken. Tomorrow, I would leave this house. And they would be left with something far worse than regret. They'd be left with themselves. They locked me in like a prisoner. They thought they had time. But by the time they noticed, I was already gone. They thought I'd disappear quietly. But I left them something. A silence too loud to ignore. The sun rose early that morning. I hadn't slept. But I didn't feel tired. I felt sharp. Like steel cooling before the strike. At exactly 6:02 a.m. I heard it. A gentle tap. 3 times. On the small window above the radiator. Like we used to do as kids when sneaking out of the school library. It was Mason. Old, slower than I remembered. But solid. Reliable. I moved quickly. Grabbed the one bag I had managed to keep hidden under the bed. Inside, my notebook, my wallet, and a sealed envelope. The most important thing I owned wasn't a deed. It was what I'd written in that envelope the night before. But I'll get to that. I slid the window open. Mason reached in, helped me pull myself through. My hip ached. But I didn't cry out. I just bit down. And moved. We didn't say a word. Not yet. By the time Diane opened my door with a tray of toast and coffee, I was already gone. Kyle's voice came moments later, rising through the floorboards. He's not in here. What the hell, how? The sound of footsteps slamming across the hallway was music. The slamming doors. The chaos. It was all confirmation. They never expected I'd act. They thought I'd beg. Or crumble. Or sign. They forgot I had lived through more than a broken hip. I'd buried a wife. Fought off poverty. Taught thousands of kids who came from broken homes. I wasn't weak. I was just quiet. Until now. Mason didn't ask much on the drive. Only glanced over once and said, "I remember when you used to fix everyone's bikes on the block, even when your back hurt. It's good to return the favor." We reached Cedar Lane around 7:30. The street was just waking up. Birds on wires. Sprinklers ticking. My house looked the same. But different. Like seeing an old friend after years apart, familiar, yet distant. I had left that house months ago in an ambulance. Now I returned, not as a patient, but as a man reclaiming what was his. The lock turned easily. No one had changed it. Because no one believed I'd ever come back without permission. Inside smelled like dust and quiet. But it was mine. Every wall. Every floorboard. The chair by the window where I used to drink tea with my wife. The kitchen where Diane took her first steps. They had no right to it. Not really. Not morally. And soon, not legally either. I made another call. This time, to someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 15 years. Linda Kasner. A woman who used to sit in the back row of my 7th grade English class. Now a real estate lawyer with a specialty in title protections and emergency injunctions. She picked up right away. "Mr. Price? Oh my God, I still remember how you made us memorize Frost poems. What do you need?" I told her everything. She didn't hesitate. By 9 a.m., a motion had been filed at the county clerk's office. By noon, there was a temporary injunction blocking any transfer of ownership, sale, or encumbrance on the Cedar Lane property. Meaning, Kyle couldn't touch it. Couldn't sell it. Couldn't fake a power of attorney. Couldn't do a thing. At 12:17 p.m., Diane called. I let it ring. At 12:24, she texted. "Where are you?" "We're worried. Please just talk to me." I didn't reply. Because I wasn't ready to talk. Not yet. She and Kyle needed time. Time to sit in the house where they had locked me in. Time to wonder what I was planning. Time to fear what came next. That afternoon, I opened my notebook. Flipped past all the old entries. Until I reached a fresh page. And I wrote. The first strike is silence. The second is the law. The third is memory. They had underestimated what I still remembered. What I still had written. What I still had filed away in drawers and safety boxes. Documents. Proof. Witnesses. I had everything. I stayed in my house that night. Sat on the back porch with Mason. Watched the stars return to a sky I once thought I'd never see again. And I knew. This was just the beginning. They tried to take my peace. So I took theirs instead. They tried to erase me. To take what I built and silence who I was. But this house was never just a building. It was a memory. A promise. And I was still here. Still standing. The first knock came just after 9 a.m. I was in the kitchen, brewing tea. Earl Grey, my wife's favorite. It wasn't polite. It wasn't gentle. It was the kind of knock that doesn't ask permission. It demands entry. I knew it would be Kyle. I opened the door slowly. Let the chain stay on. Just enough for his face to appear. He was furious. Hair wild. Eyes bloodshot. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice cracked at the edges. Fear disguised as anger. I didn't answer. I just looked at him. And waited. You disappear, you sneak out, and now I get a call from the damn county clerk saying I can't touch the property? What kind of game are you playing, Frank? It's not a game, I said calmly. It's protection. From people like you. He slammed his hand against the door. I didn't flinch. You can't do this. Diane and I, we took care of you. You locked me in a room. You owe us. I smiled. I owe you nothing. You walked into my house and tried to take it with a smile. Now you're walking away with an empty hand. You think this is over, he growled. You think paperwork is going to stop me? It already has. I closed the door. Slow. Deliberate. Let him shout through the wood. His words didn't matter. They weren't truth. They were panic. The sound of a man losing power he never earned. Later that afternoon, Diane came. Alone. No makeup. No jewelry. Just tired eyes and hands that kept clenching and unclenching at her sides. She stood at the porch steps for a while before saying anything. Dad, we need to talk. I nodded. We sat on the old bench. The one she used to climb when she was 6. Now it creaked under her guilt. She didn't try to justify Kyle. Not this time. Instead, she asked, how did you even do this? Who helped you? I took a breath. Sipped my tea. People remember kindness. Even when time forgets. I helped kids learn when no one else believed in them. Now they're lawyers. Clerks. Neighbors. You thought I was alone. I never was. She wiped her eyes. But said nothing. I gave you love, I continued. Not because I wanted anything back, but because I believed that's what family does. And you sold that love for convenience. It wasn't like that, she whispered. But it was. Silence. I stood slowly. Still steady. Still standing. You need to go, Diane. I'm not angry. I'm not cruel. But this house, this life, is no longer something you or Kyle get to rewrite. We're not trying to hurt you. But you did. She nodded, tears falling without sound, then turned and left. That evening, I received a call from Linda. The injunction was accepted for a longer term. We were filing for a permanent protection against any title fraud or coercion. She had also found something else. A trail of fake offers, unauthorized notary attempts, and Kyle's name attached to multiple shady real estate filings across the county. We were going to the police. Then the judge. I sat by the window that night, notebook on my lap. And I wrote, let them scream. Let them spin. I've already won. Because I never left myself behind. My phone buzzed. A text from Mason. One line. You stood tall, old friend. Proud of you. And I realized something. I didn't win because I had power. I won because I had memory. Because I had dignity. Because I refused to believe silence was the only option. They wanted my house. But they took something more valuable, my trust. So I gave them something they never saw coming. Not revenge. But consequence. And consequence. has a long memory. When the court day arrived, I was surprised by how bright the sky was. The sun had risen, but there were still shadows inside me. Only now, I no longer let them swallow me whole. Mason picked me up. In the same old Chevy he still drove. It felt like everything was the same, but nothing really was. The courthouse was an old stone building. Cold air lingered inside, but I felt warm. Because this time, I wasn't alone. Linda met me at the door. She held files, documents, witness statements. Before the hearing began, she said only one thing. We have enough to make the judge ask questions Kyle can't answer. When Kyle walked in, he was still angry. But for the first time, there was fear in his eyes. Diane walked beside him, slowly. Her eyes met mine for just a second, then dropped to the floor. As the judge read through the documents, his face changed. At first, it looked like a simple property dispute. But when Linda laid out everything, Kyle's attempt to forge documents, his effort to sell the house using a fake power of attorney, and most importantly, the evidence that he had tried to isolate and pressure an elderly man, the judge asked, Mr. Kyle Vickers, did you attempt to coerce Mr. Price into signing over his deed under duress while restricting his movement and contact with others? Kyle began to sweat. His jaw clenched. He swallowed hard. I don't remember it like that, Your Honor. The judge lowered his glasses. That's not what the evidence shows. Then he turned to me and asked a single question. Mr. Price, do you wish to press charges? At that moment, I looked at my hands. The same hands that had held chalk, dug gardens, raised a child. No, Your Honor, I said. I don't want punishment. I want protection. And the judge granted it. A restraining order on the house. A legal block on fraudulent transactions. And an official warning, any further attempt at coercion could result in jail time. Kyle stormed out of the courtroom. Diane didn't follow him. As I walked out, I paused, turned to her, and said only this. You asked me to be grateful for being alive. I am. Because I lived long enough to see who you really are, and to stop you from becoming worse. She lowered her head, tears in her eyes, but said nothing. And this time, I turned my back and walked away. That night, I returned to my home on Cedar Lane. The chair was still there. So was the lamp, my books, and the breeze on the porch. They had all been waiting for me. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote one final line. They taught me betrayal, but I taught them loss. Not by force, but by remembering who I am, and never letting go of it again. ChatGPT soar.